Okay, welcome back. It is 7/27 of 2015. We want to look again at the second moment of our talk on moving from plerothosis of the many to the teleosis of the manifold, because Brentano has added additional content to the teleosis of the manifold with regard to how we acquire that notion of the true, and then how we form that interrelated sign model. So let's take a look at that second moment again. We realize that our teleosis is never limited in extension, and it is never a singularity. We form a summation of the many parts as a manifold unity of signification signs. So we want to lift this concreto of topoids in their interrelated place to an abstracto of a manifold of a new spiritual unity. We want to move from concreto many to abstracto manifold new, a manifold character of the truly one spiritual unification. We do that by acquiring the relevant mark of each topoid thing, and we do it by just momentarily positing the temporal continuum. Just take a little glimpse of the eschatological trajectory of all of these topoid things in their interrelated proper place. We find that momentary temporal continuum mark. We add those marks together and acquire a manifold signification of a unity. And this is when Brentano says that we do that because we lift each of the topoid things to a notion of their deeper truth. We lift each topoid thing to its notion of the true, and by lifting it to a notion of the true, it equals sign or signification. Instead of topoid, it becomes topoid sign, a sign in its proper place. We must lift each topoid thing to its notion of deeper truth, to its notion of deeper spiritual truth. He says we do this by first of all realizing its foundation, which is a sui-generis, a reality that cannot be reduced or abbreviated under any other concept or any other reality. It is the divine sui-generis of transcendent continuum, or the ultimate divine primary presentation that underlies and encloses all presentations, primary and secondary. From this spiritual transcendence, we get glimpses of what Brentano calls abstract magnitude, or ideal properties for each of the topoid things. We start apprehending, because of temporarily positing that temporal continuum, we get a glimpse of ideal properties that each topoid possesses. And by looking at those ideal properties, we can form that topoid into a signification, into a sign of something that points to something greater than itself. It's no longer limited to the concreto, but there's an abstract something which is greater than what it currently exists as. We form a signification for the topoid thing. We lift topoid to sign. It becomes a topoid sign. And this is a mark that Brentano calls homogeneous spiritual genus. There's a spiritual genus within which all of these signs are gathered, a holistic gathering of a spiritual genus. That's the sign-like signification of what used to be concrete enclosure. Well, concrete enclosure becomes homogeneous spiritual genus. So it's no longer concrete enclosure. Now it is homogeneous spiritual genus of an abstract spiritual magnitude, reflecting an abstract spiritual magnitude of the cyclical. So now we've got a whole new network. We started out at the very first moment of intuition with a network of lexical things, but through our unitary intuitive work, we lifted that network, that lexical network of things, to a lexical network of topoid things in their proper interrelated space. we did apprehend interrelated space at the intuitive level. But now we enter into a little bit of analytic work now. Now we're moving from the intuitive to the analytical, and the analytical looks at the ideal qualities of each topoid thing in its proper place, and in that interrelatedness, we start picking up ideal qualities, ideal properties, because we temporarily posit that eschatological continuum, that eschatological temporal continuum, as just a little temporary positing, and we start grasping the ideal spiritual psychical qualities out of that new lexical network of topoids. But once we lift those ideal properties out of the topoids, now we lift our entire lexical network to the level of signification. We form the topoid into abstract sign. It's no longer concrete topoid. Concrete topoid gets lifted to abstract sign. Each concrete topoid becomes a singular abstract sign. So concreto topoid, abstracto sign. And you get an entire, now we have an entire brand new lexical network as our reference point. We no longer have a sensate topoid lexical network. Now we have an analytical, psychical, abstract sign network. Not the primary concrete topoid network, but the secondary psychical abstracto signification network, a brand new lexical network. So, with this brand new lexical network, Brentano says we need to form a homonymy of relation. Well, what's that another term for? It's a term for sign model. You take the lexical network of signs, you form them into an interrelated sign model. We already have the concrete topoid interrelatedness still in our memory. We have a memory of place already in that concreto topoid model. Well, concreto topoid model now has a brand new signification sign lexical network. So we want to form a true abstracto sign model, and we want to take a look at that which lies between the topoids that have been elevated to signs. We take that brand new lexical network of signs, and out of their interrelatedness, we form a sign model of correspondence. Initially, it has to be correspondence. It can't be eschatological goal right off the bat. Before we can move on to eschatological goal, we begin by forming the model of correspondence. So we begin with a sign model of correspondence that reflects the abstract spiritual magnitude of psychical presentation, the ideal properties, and that temporal continuum. And what we want to do is unite that previously apprehended flat plane of concrete boundary with the four-dimensional continuum that is apprehended in the secondary presentation of the psychical, and that, of course, is enclosed within that same boundary of the first presentation. So the continuum of topoid places belongs to a singular abstracto sign genus enclosure. We're lifting the entire topoid model to signification genus model. And we realize that our genus model, our spiritual signification genus model, is nested in the transcendent Sui-Generis of the first absolute continuum, of the ultimate absolute continuum that encloses every singular abstracto sign genus that we form. But this is at the level of correspondence because we can't yet move into praxis positing. We can't yet move into positing an eschatological goal toward the good. First, we have to have the corresponding sign model. We first have to begin with where we currently exist before we can move on to the eschatological model of anticipating the good as the Greek nobility of Aristotle. For Brentano, it's always the goal of the Greek concept of beauty, which was translated literally as a moral nobility, but we don't posit a goal of eschatological nobility as yet. First, we form the model, the abstracto model, from our obliquo slanted view of apprehension, our spiritual apprehension as obliquo. We're going to lift the concrete topoids to abstracto signification, to abstract signs, and each of the abstract signs is going to reflect a deeper meaning of ideal properties, and then we're going to gather all those ideal properties together to form the overall abstracto Sui-Generis, which is the new enclosure that lifts the concreto boundary of the primary to a secondary fourth dimension of a abstracto Sui-Generis model. And the abstracto Sui-Generis model will enclose an entire group of interrelated signs that have been lifted out of their concreto topoid state to becoming true significations of ideal qualities that point toward the ideal good that is beyond themselves. So each sign is pointing beyond itself, and the entire enclosure as a spiritual genus is also pointing beyond itself. Now, where is it pointing? Well, before we can move there, we have to begin with correspondence. So right now, we've formed the corresponding sign model. From here, we're going to realize that we need to actualize that ideal model. Well, to actualize that ideal model, you have to switch on the switch of praxis, action and reflection within a concrete, particular historical situation. That's the definition of praxis. Once you flick on that switch of praxis, then you're going to take on the attitude of a servant. You're going to go out of the ideal. You're going to enter into the concrete sensate realm with your ideal model of positing, and you're going to work to actualize it. You're going to share it, and you're going to work to actualize it, and you're going to move with this abstracto Sui-Generis enclosure, and you're going to apply it in those areas where you see the good on the verge of emerging, where you see the Greek nobility on the verge of emerging. You're going to posit in that particular place and try to actualize the good, to try to actualize the eschatological goal of the Sui-Generis, of the primary absolute presentation that encloses and underlies all reality, all primary and secondary presentation. So we get a little bit more content on apprehending the notion of the true, and that'll take us up through the actually the end of the first essay on continuum.